Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
And that's that. Welcome to Silly Whales. This is a mental health podcast. I'm so close to saying brought to you by Manscaped. It's bad. It's a constant issue now, isn't it? Like, oh Jesus. It's because it fits in well.
No, it's because you've been indoctrinated. You've been indoctrinated.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's it. Totally. We discuss things to do with mental health, and sometimes we might discuss things that are potentially triggering. This podcast is for everyone. We are all inclusive, but this might not be for you, and that is okay. It might not be for you, and that is okay. We don't discriminate, but we do hate racism. But there's a serious issue that I need to let all of you guys know about, and it is very, very serious, okay? I mean, put down your cup of tea. If you're drinking the stupid pumpkin spice bollocks, whatever it is, put that down too, okay? In Springfield, they're eating cats and dogs. The immigrants are eating the cats and dogs, okay? And I have no idea how we've not realized this until Donald Trump, the man himself, exposed it all. Thank you.
I've missed this, apparently. When did this happen?
So they had the presidential debate.
Okay.
And it was a car crash thanks to Donald Trump. Very, very, very poor showing. Looked like an old man. And this is not even me being like a full-on, politics, This is just like, removing the political emphasis of it, it felt like a rich woman having a conversation with a senile old man. And it felt really sad to witness. And it was just a lot of like, we're discussing this topic, and then the immigrants are coming in and they're going to steal the country. And it's like, this is a lot of people's hero. Damn. Makes sense now. It truly makes sense.
How old was Obama when he became president?
I don't even know, man. Like, but he wasn't senile. He wasn't
No, he definitely
incoherent.
wasn't. I'm just trying to see, like, there's been a lot of old presidents recently.
It's just been Trump, Biden.
Yes, but I really hope that there isn't another one, which is Trump again. But if that happens.
It makes you realize something, though, because as idiotic as the statements were, it's scary when you see people like parrot them and say them with like the same gusto that he is and believing it verbatim because he said it. And it's like, wow, like you can literally fact check this information, and you're not supposed to. Apparently, you're not supposed to if you're on that political spectrum. The fact checkers aren't really fact checkers, and they don't fact check properly. You need my fact checker, which is what I say goes. The things that they're claiming to be against is pretty much what they all are. So, we're against the woke mind virus who are trying to make us all fall in line. But here we are restricting women's reproductive rights. Hey, look at that. And it's crazy because I foresee the UK going down a somewhat similar route. Well, it already has, actually. I mentioned this maybe on the early episodes of the show. Hopefully I did. But I feel like there'll be like an abortion rights debate coming up soon. And that debate had already come up and gone as well.
And
I think that we're going to have another one. I think that we're going to have a lot of people knocking on the door claiming to be for our religious rights as a Christian country. I think we're going to have those people existing. Jesus.
I just want to point out, by the way, because I mentioned the senility I kind of focused on. We're not trying to be ageist or anything. Like, I think it just comes down. I think that there's a genuine issue to a certain extent with running a country with old people in terms of just for the person themselves. It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense to have someone who is likely going to have to deal with a lot of health issues to quite an extreme degree to be a president. It's quite an unusual thing. I mean, it's there's been versions of like monarchy that have had like seniority as like the oldest in the family would take over, not just like the eldest son or whatever, that kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, there's a bit of a problem when everyone who comes into power is only in power for like a few years, and it's not necessarily and it's really not their best years, like it's not good.
Well, that's it though. Like, we say that, but America is run by mostly old white people, like really old white people. Like, we look at the Mitch McConnells of this world, and they're just in charge. They've been around for ages. Like, the Senator Lindsey Graham, they've been around for ages. So they have their stronghold where they'll always get votes regardless of who they are and what they do. And they're past it in terms of like what you call a quote unquote prime. They're past it. They don't offer anything new. They never do. They just support what they're told to support, and they toe a line. And over here in the UK, it's the same thing as well. Like, you can look at various backed by money guys who are in charge of our biggest corporations and things like that. And so it's a guy who knows nothing. He's very out of touch with the world. So there's never any reason to change those positions because they don't want to lose power. And the people who are underneath them don't want to lose that access to power. So there's not much of a shift that's needed. Like, it'll be refreshing to have somebody younger in charge of something, but it's hard. It's very hard to get that because, of course.
No, you still gotta get up and reach this.
No, I was gonna say, like, because of course, like, they wouldn't vote for a 29-year-old because they don't know anything about the world yet, and they'll say that about a 35-year-old, and then when you're 40, they'll be like, "Oh, but that's a good age, but they don't have the experience of being a politician." There's always a reason why, and then all of a sudden you hit 50 to 50s upwards. It's like, yeah, that's a perfect age, and you realize who's saying it. People who are 50 plus are saying it, So there's that trust element of it all, and who they trust with maturity. And you realize that people get disqualified for how they appear and how society tells you to look at how they appear rather than just in general, are they good at the job? So we've lost out.
I think it's I agree with you almost entirely on what you said. I think that, being able to build up power and wealth in your life and things like this means that you are the kinds of people that then get a monopoly on the say of the kinds of people that should be in power and gaining wealth. But I think what's interesting is that systematizes systematically, essentially, forms this chain of people coming up in age to be like those people, with the promise that, like, once you hit this age, then you'll be able to be in my position. And so I think that there's a reasonable. I think I'm frustrated by only having people who are much older in charge, but I find that to be more of a frustration than a descriptive sentiment about the problems with the world as it is, or government or whatever, because I also think that there are many people who are much younger who are not going to be. And a lot of those people are just the next in line to those other older people. So it's not so it's more a description of the moving forward of the progression of politics, essentially, and how far back some ideas feel in age. But you'll still find people who are doing shit that Mosley was talking about in this country, or Hitler was talking about, for example, who are you and my age. Like, so it's one of those. It's a frustration, I feel. It's not so much me like a declarative statement in the way. I don't want to try and be like bigoted basically against old people. I'm not trying to be that. But it is frustrating. And I think the most frustrating bit is that it is the fact that it's quite clearly not working out for some of these people, especially when we start looking at, like, Biden's administration was very, very good overall. Like, comparatively to lots of administrations in America, it actually did pretty well, as I understand it. And the idea But the idea that, like, all of the stuff going around, and all of the political stuff around his health and things like that was such a key thing that it's a wonder why it's very odd, because it's a double standard that's being created, and it's a very hypocritical point, which is that, like, politics has to be for these kinds of people, or these kinds of people are the ones who, because they have all the experience or whatever, but then they also are the kinds of people that are going to be put into these positions where they can then be laser focused on for being that old. So it's a very bad standard to hold from, in terms of what the media is portraying, and hopefully people can kind of see through that. But I also know that people don't necessarily think that way. I'm trying to be a bit better about talking about this stuff, because I've realized recently a few things which we'll probably go over. But yeah, I don't know how to feel about politics at the moment, in terms of I actually genuinely don't know what the future looks like. Like I have like you talked about, like, a sort of mild prediction you have, or at least a feeling you have towards the trajectory of certain kinds of politics. But I truly don't know, because I see one side and then see the other side doing a lot better than I expected, and then seeing the other side doing better. I say better than I expected in the sense that they seem to be bigger than I thought. And I think it's just that the shouting match that happens, it becomes quite difficult to determine what the state of the country is. We had a whole conversation where I can't remember if it was on the politics one or if it was a different one, where I was describing how the lack of communication as a general populace means, like, the fact that our politics tends to be behind closed doors and is rarely spoken about between individuals in a more open kind of, like, in a more open amphitheater kind of way, if you would want to think of it that way. Like, because there isn't, like, a huge amount of sort of community description about things. It's very difficult to get a gauge on what the world is like, basically, what our world is like. It really surprised me when I found out what the average age of the UK was, but it comes down to the fact that I obviously hang out with people who are younger in age group, because that's my age group, and the older people I don't hang out with as much. And then I find out, the average age in the UK is like 40 something. Like, it's not like high 40s, but it's like 41 or something like that. And it's like, that seems old to me, but that's not really, when you think of how old people can be. We are in a very different. We're not just in a world right now that I think is quite difficult for us to understand. We're also in a world that has been changing very quickly over the last 50 years. I mean, especially since the 1950s. And because of that huge change, because of the changes that have happened, it is quite difficult to gauge what the world should be even looking like. Like, statistics now actually are revealing really odd things that you wouldn't expect about our society and other societies and so on. So yeah, a bit of a mindfuck. But I'm trying to re-establish that in my brain, and try and re-gauge, and maybe look at my old ideas and review them slightly.
Yeah, like I'm kind of checking out of politics. I don't really want to be involved in, like, mainstream politics, so I'm becoming a far right activist. No, so I want to do more like I want to do more like ground root stuff. I want to be more politically active in a sense of community work, rather than just the good old, like, I labor good, because I think that politics should be more nuanced than that. And it'd be good to see, like, that as a productive form of engaging with something. Can you change the world by involving young people and getting them involved in things like community events, and being an educator for things like human rights and what's happening overseas, and just not yelling at people and be like, hey, vote the way I do. But more, hey, can you get people motivated to be more inclusive, to be less racist, to be less homophobic, to be less transphobic? Can you do that rather than just look at the binary of politics and be like, yeah, we only care about these things? But
how very anarchist of you.
Yeah, sure. like, I don't want to put a label onto it because that's what happens. Like, it's a lot of it is just like, well, yeah, like that means you're a this, that means you're a that. It's like, oh, just stop, man, just stop. Like,
Yeah.
you know, because again, it's like that same political tribalism or something. You know, if you say that you're a centrist, it's the worst thing ever. Everyone hates you. If you say that you're like some way versed left and some way versed right, everyone says they hate you. Pick a side, you pick a team, get the t-shirt, and get your name on the back of it. You know, it's like, okay, I don't know, it's a weird one. But I think I'm going to segue completely. Thinking about mental health and all stuff, I've been thinking about like I've been playing Football Manager a lot. It's been a really good distraction from everything. And
Okay.
and my Red Bull London save is going really well. And I have like this stupid thing of caring too much about the mental health of numbers and bits of code. So it's like I sent you out on loan to West Brom.
Okay. Yeah.
So funny enough, you now live like near where you actually live, which is like, wait, West Brom is in Bromwich is in. Am I going crazy? Where West Brom is in Midlands, right? Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I don't really know where West Brom is.
Yeah,
Like
because
I'm not that good geography.
They face Aston Villa, who is also in the Midlands, in a rivalry. So yeah, they definitely are. So they are like a
West
West
Bromwich
Midlands
is
team.
Birmingham. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we
Okay.
go.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. Mental breakdown averted. I like you're playing really well, and I'm just like, I need another centre back to come in, and I'm not going to sign one because you're coming back at the end of the season, but I need one now. Like, do I take you away from West Brom and you're really like everything says you're really happy, and I'm like, do I take away your happiness just for you to
Take
come
it
back
away.
and like play a few games here and there, but you're starting every single game. Like you want Player of the Month. I'm like maybe he's settled there. Like if West Brom put in a bid, am I gonna sell them my Cuban international Joe? like, like
This other universe Joe, this Cuban Joe, like that is just doing really great in his life. I'm just so happy for him.
like it's really bad. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Joe. I keep forgetting that you're Cuban in the game. So like when you get called up to international duty, we see like, oh, Ben has been called up for England under 21s. Like I've been called up. Yeah, oh yeah, me as a goalkeeper in the game is hilarious. I've been called up to the under 21s for England like 17 times, and I've played none. I've been sat on the bench.
Actually, yeah, how often what are you like third string then or second string? I don't actually know how much people get called in to like goalkeepers. I mean, like how often they rotate goalkeepers in international
Like,
games.
for like certain games they rotate them. For like friendlies, they tend to rotate goalkeepers quite a bit. But then it's a hard balance because like you rotate a goalkeeper for one international friendly, and that might be the only international friendly you play for a good like 3 or 4 months. But the
Right.
frequency of international games is like increasing as we go along. But it's so difficult to build like a steady system. So it's like if someone's gonna take a goalkeeper spot at international level, it's a big change to make because there's very
Yeah.
little time to establish it. So the change is normally made like for the national team because what will happen will be like, oh, this goalkeeper's no longer playing for his like club side anymore. So he can't really be picked for the national team because there's other goalkeepers who are now of the same level as him but playing week in, week out. So like Arsenal's old goalkeeper Aaron Ramsdale was called up, and he's normally like the backup to the main goalkeeper Jordan Pickford.
Mm-hmm.
He lost his place in the England squad entirely because he wasn't playing Arsenal and he just joined Southampton. So like he has to start playing regularly again and playing well to reclaim like that number 2 England spot. So it's really weird how the pecking order is like kind of sad because you could have really good goalkeepers and they will never get like many caps because the time to play them is never really there,
I mean,
which is sad.
The person, I guess the person can't just like randomly choose anyone, but like the manager. How does recruitment work in that? I don't know. I don't know if
Yeah,
this is worth talking about, but
for sure.
it just occurs to me that this is like something I don't actually know about.
For sure. Like if a manager, so managers will tend to pick the best players possible. So like in this case, a football manager, I actually won the Euros with England, like, and it was really weird because I had 3 goalkeepers. Aaron Ramsdale was starting every game, and Jordan Pickford was a backup. And it's like I picked the goalkeepers who played the most and played the best. So then it was easy to pick, and that's how most teams pick the their main nationals teams. Like they pick them based off of like how they're playing, and if they fit the national team's ideology. Like, there's some players who don't get picked because they don't play the way the manager wants, and a lot of people go, "That's silly, that's stupid. Just pick him anyway." But imagine that you're taking a guy to a tournament who you know won't play well because you're playing him not in his best position, but you're just picking him because everyone wants you to pick him.
Well,
it's kind of a waste of a spot.
Like Pickford, I don't know why Pickford was chosen for the first time that he was in an international, event. But the reason he was in the European Cup more recently was because he's had that international experience. Like he's
proven to be an incredible goalkeeper. He's played. He's playing at the highest level for a team that is facing a lot of shots in Everton. Like Everton's a miserable place to go to. You might if you're gonna do a silly Welsh present, you might as well do one on Everton itself. Like just talking to their fans, like offering out free hugs and cupcakes or whatever, because like it's a miserable place. But he's doing really well in keeping them in the Premier League for like the past 3 or 4 seasons. So he has an excellent highlights package as well. It's just him making saves because he has to. Because if he doesn't, well, they lose. Well, they still lose anyway, but they lose more. So he got picked for that.
He's been artificially trained, like to just do so much more in a in as long a period of time, just because he has to do better just to keep everyone going.
His stats are incredible because he just faces a barrage of shots.
That idea is hilarious.
But and also like as most goalkeepers are, like he's crazy. You'll see him randomly talk to himself, like middle of a game.
Mate, I love him. I actually love him. He became my favorite player at one point when I think it was actually like the World Cup, like back in what year would it have been? 2018? Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it was 2018. I think it's when I saw him for the first time. If he was the goalkeeper, then I actually don't remember if he was.
Yeah, he was.
I feel like he was. Okay, cool. And I remember seeing him, and I just remember being like, he's so angry. I love him. Like he just kept, but he was so good. Like, and I was like, mate, he's just like got it fucking in it. And I was just like, you know what? I actually really like this guy.
Yeah, people hate him. People call him T-Rex arms.
Fuck him. This guy's great.
My favorite was in the Euros when he was in was it the Euros? Yeah, I think it was penalty shootout, and he was just like, he's like, yeah, I've got this, no problem. Fuck him, I don't care. Fuck him, I got this. And it's like they're just like pacing back and forth. I'm like, well, that's incredible. Like, I'm a fan. I love this. But that's
also,
it.
As someone who talks to themselves quite a lot and would do it on the street if I wasn't, and I do it on the street when no one's around. Like and being embarrassed by other people when people come up, even within sight of me, when I have to stop doing it. I'm like I totally understand. Like to me, he's like, that's fine. I'm good with that.
Yeah. It's like like placing back to Football Manager. That's what else was going on. I was thinking about what would Joe think like about this situation? What would player Joe think about the situation? And I was thinking about like me as well. I was looking at like the bench. I'm currently fighting for the number 1 spot for Red Bull London after like nearly 4 seasons of being number 3 goalkeeper. It's just like, and now I'm facing off against like the veteran Thomas Kaminski to become like the Premier League number 1 goalkeeper. I'm thinking, man, Alex Cupid is struggling. Like he's really like he's really fighting to be number one here. And there's a high chance that I might not trust myself enough to be number one. So I might have to sign like a really good goalkeeper and put myself as number two again. It's like I'm just thinking too much about this. I'm like, oh God. And then I have an issue like up front as well. I have Ryan, who plays in every position bar the defense, but he's now playing as a striker, and he's like one of the best strikers. And he's the best striker in like our team, effectively, because he's scoring lots of goals. And then I have a 35-year-old Nico Fulkrug, who is like
Okay.
the angry uncle. And then I have like two like young strikers who are supposed to be the main starting guy. But then the like Ryan and Fulkrug are like killing it all. I'm like, this is great. This is so much fun. And then I signed a random 19-year-old from Man City. I'm like, okay, he's gonna play on the right. But I'm like, what about the young guys? And then God, well, everyone's emotional health is in my hands. It's just like, what do I do? and it's just like, well, there's only so much you can get wrong here. But you always feel like you're on the brink of somebody being upset in the game. I was thinking, can I handle management like at the highest level as a football coach? Like, could I handle like having a player walk in and be like, hey, I've not played in like 6 games. Why do you hate me? like, could I handle that in real life? I'm thinking, I don't know.
Because I was going to ask, because obviously you have literally done this sort of activity anyway, where you've been involved very heavily with not just players but young people, right? Because you've done stuff with teaching in schools and young people dealing with shit. Like you've done a lot, right?
As well as dealing with actual being like a manager of a team.
Yeah, as well as actually dealing with football players, like sports people. I feel like the reason you're even questioning in this is because you have that experience, so you have like an actual idea about a person. Like you're actually thinking about or you're almost projecting onto people you've actually experienced in real life as existing, that you can really consciously think of what the choices you're making in a game actually mean outside of it, right? Would mean in an actual scenario. But obviously in real life, if you knew that there were certain things, I do not doubt, like if you knew that certain things were happening, I do not doubt that you would be able to say to yourself, okay, well, I'm gonna do my best to figure out a solution to this problem and like actually actively do something about it, right? Like to me, I've always seen you as someone who has always been very caring. So if there was any way in which you could make sure someone knew why certain things were happening and so on and so forth, like that guy who's like, oh, why do you hate me that you haven't put me in 6 games already? And it's like, let me explain to you what's happening, let me show you what my plans are, blah blah blah, and just kind of you just have like, I don't know, like very open discussion with players and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, you have
I'm
to. Like,
talking out my
I'm
ass,
coaching now.
Yeah.
Even when I'm coaching now, like I've been coaching 7-a-side a lot recently, and it's really like I'm coaching an under 17 team and an under 18 league, and I took off like arguably one of our like better, stronger players, and he wasn't happy. I was like,
7-a-side, by the way. That's weird. What kind of formations are those 7-a-side?
So like you can play a variety. Like you have one goalkeeper, of course, and you have 6 outfield players. So you could set it up however you want to set it up. I like the 2-3-1, which is 2 defenders, 3 people in the middle, and 1 striker, one striker up top. However, I also have to figure out the context of which like these boys will thrive in. And I know what formation they used to play. So it's always about figuring out what are my non-negotiables and what are my things I'm willing to compromise on. And how we set up is something I'm always willing to compromise on because it doesn't really matter. Like at the end of the day, how we set up doesn't really change anything. It's about how we actually perform. I could say I want 1 defender and everybody to be up front. Realistically speaking, if I were to say, but everyone's roles individually and say, actually, the 1 defender's fine, but the 2 people ahead of him you're always going to drop back and support and defense. Oh, look, it's the exact same thing as having three defenders at the back. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you can just say whatever. It's all about the instructions you give and how you give it. But yeah, it's a lot of like managing those emotions of it all, and people are gonna be frustrated, and that's the easy bit. That's the easy bit. The hard bit is getting yourself ready to understand that you have to hurt people's feelings sometimes. And it's like, you will take off a player at halftime, not because you hate him, but because somebody else needs to play.
Mm-hmm.
And they won't understand that every single time. And it's like, it's difficult to get young people to understand that other people need opportunities to shine as well. And the only way I understand that, the only way I've managed to understand that in my life, and why I'm so happy to like rotate myself as a player, is because as a player growing up, I was never a number one choice goalkeeper. I was at the highest level of like academy football, but I was never number one. Like I wasn't even signed to an actual deal like when I was with Arsenal's academy. I couldn't break in there. Like I understand like the levels of it all. So I understand if I'm like picked for a team and I'm playing Sunday League now and I'm playing outfield. I understand if like the manager comes to me and says, "Hey, I can only give you like 5-10 minutes." I'm never gonna be like, "Oh, fuck this shit. No, how could you? Do you know who the fuck I am? Suck my dick, motherfucker. I'm gonna come for you." Huh? Like it's just not in my nature to complain about that, because even if the manager's wrong in that decision, I don't feel like I get any benefit, nor does the team, nor does anybody around me or close to me get any benefit from me complaining and crying about something that clearly I'm not going to change in that moment. Like,
Right.
You know, it is what it is. Like, and people hate when I say this because they're quick to get on the high horse of like, you can't say this, but guess what? It's okay to be second best as long as you know the pathway to become the best. You know? Like, if you know how to get to the number one spot, then being second best is okay. Because it's a process. Things take time. You're not going to be guaranteed to be first choice everywhere you go in every aspect, you know? And all the grind set bros are crying right now. But guess what? You're second best in a lot of things. Just nobody can be asked to tell you. like, you know, there's always that element of like, I have to be the best at everything. You can't. I have to be like playing every single minute, every single game. You probably won't. Like, if your body doesn't shut down and stop you, then a good manager probably will end up stopping you as well, especially at the youth level. But yeah, football manager. Yeah, like, so it got to a point where I was so emotionally invested in the game. And I was like, And then I had Kestis, who came back from a loan in Scotland, St. Johnstone. And I was like, I'm going to have to sell Kestis. I tried to sell Kestis because like I wanted to play games. He is like Lithuania's like best centre back, but he's not going to get any football at all. And of course, we know Kestis in real life, right? So I'm like, oh God, like the mental turmoil of all that stuff. I'm like, I have a Scottish centre back called Charlie MacArthur, who's an actual footballer. I'm like, Kestis isn't going to beat him because Kestis isn't as good as the ball in him. So how do I sell him? And then like West Ham came in for like a £15 million bid, and I'm going to have to accept it. And I accepted it. And the first game of the season, Charlie MacArthur pulls his groin. I'm like, looks like Kestis is playing. And unbeknownst to me, I haven't actually checked Kestis' stats at all. Kestis made a dramatic improvement while I was in Scotland. I just didn't notice. So now Kestis is starting every single game at centre back. And Charlie MacArthur's like, can I play? I'm like,
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, I was like, and like even like the season beforehand in the game, this is so boring for anyone who doesn't care about Football Manager, which is the majority of our listenership. There was a game last season where it was such a wholesome thing because it was me in goal. Okay, good old Alex Cupid in goal. It was you at centre back and Kess at left centre back. Okay, it was like great. It was my good friend Ben. It was my good friend Casey at right and left back. And then in defensive midfield was Toga. I was like, the whole squad is assembled here. Like, we lost 6-0, but like, the whole squad was assembled. You know, like Arsenal absolutely killed us, but the whole squad was there for one game, and I felt really happy in that moment. As all the goals fly past me, I had a 6.1 performance out of 10. Like, I'm sure one of the goals went through my character in a graphical glitch error of some sort, but
Well, it's just
doesn't
Arsenal
matter.
cheat.
Yeah, clearly, as always. I'm like, as the Arsenal fan I am, but it was a good, happy moment, and I was like, we're all here. You know, we're all here. We're all like, all the lads are here. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I want the thing is, like, because I know you like sort of mentioned the fact that probably a lot of people aren't interested in a lot of this discussion, but I think that what's interesting is that I feel like you, to a certain extent, you actually explained yourself really well through football or talking about like Football Manager, for example. I find that you are actually quite like emotive and expressionistic of how you feel and things like that. And I'm always like, yeah, this is nice. There's a very wholesome feel whenever I hear you talk about football. It's one of the reasons I like talking to you about it, is because I think that you have a very like genuine like care for it in a way that if I mean, right now I'm in a good mood, but on most days, like I could not be fucked about the sport whatsoever in a very like kind of almost, yeah, I kind of wish it just didn't exist, like a kind of way. But it's like, but it's kind of the thing of, well, just because I don't enjoy it doesn't mean it's not an incredible thing for people and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. So shut the fuck up, basically. Not
Yeah,
you,
like
to me in this
yeah,
case.
like you'll be surprised at how like when you do poetry and things like that, you meet the artsy fartsy type, and it's really weird when you get the reactions from people who find out that you are involved in football or you work in football, whatever. And it's like people look down on football a lot. And I actually speak to Ryan last night about this. So hi Ryan, about how like all we do is kick a football around. Well, yeah, all we do is rhyme words, like there's still somebody making the bag out of what we're doing here. So you're hating on the players. You are trying to be a player. Like you just think that what you're playing is a lot better than what they're doing. Like you're trying to make a career off rhyming words.
It's a different
That's all
form
you're
of
doing.
sport. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different thing, right? But guess what? You can simplify anything if you want it to. You can dumb it down if you want it to. And you can like minimalize its impact if you wanted to. All you
Yeah,
do
for
is
sure.
rhyme words. Like, you come up here, you tell me, oh, like Taylor Swift is such a great emotive like songwriter, and she makes me feel things. All she does is write songs. All Theo Walcott did is kick a football. Are they the same? No. Do they have the same impact on people? Yeah, for sure. Like to quote Ryan yesterday, there's nothing better than your team scoring a 90th minute winner, but there's also nothing more like damaging and hurtful than seeing your team concede a 90th minute goal. Like
Mhm.
it does something to you, And I feel like the idea of looking down on sportsmen, women, people, and looking down on sports as just a thing, and is so redundant in the overall message that we send as people who are to be inclusive of everything, right? Like I love everything except for this thing here because I think it's useless and pointless. So
Mhm.
one of the main conversations I always have with people, and it's always a weird one. It's a weird one because people emotionally respond to it. They go, "We should take footballers' wages and pay nurses instead," and the emotional response is, yeah, that should be the case because nurses do so much more for society than footballers will ever do. Da, 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 da. I love being the guy that comes in like a dickhead and goes, fuck you. Here's why you're wrong. Here's why you're wrong. It's a super simple thing. Nurses should get more money, yes, but you're not watching a footballer kick a ball around. What you're seeing is a guy's investment with loads of money who owns a football club with loads of money. They're not paying just for him to kick a football around. No, this is a business. So there's profit margins to be made. That guy kicks a ball in the goal. You think the money is earned from them winning that game? No. The money's earned from the advertising that comes with it. So it's not a matter of, oh, look, they should be paying, like, take the footballers' wages away. Nah, because it's a business. Like, this is a business. So that guy makes everyone around him richer. Your issue isn't with football, your issue is with capitalism. But you're trying to scapegoat one person for society's problem. So the argument of, oh, look, we should be paying nurses footballers' wages is stupid. If anything, we should be just paying nurses more, full stop. We should be in a society where a nurse shouldn't have to even think about that. But we're not. And your solution is to scapegoat one person rather than looking to actually blame the conglomeracies that own the contracts of these players. But, notice that you go after a footballer, but you won't go after your favorite singer or your favorite rock band because you like those things. But are you going to sit here and tell me that your favorite singer doesn't make far too much money and they could donate that stuff to nurses instead? All they do is write songs. No, you're not. Like, if anything, go after the record label that pumps them full of money and doesn't have any sort of system in which people can actually get paid from the music they make. They have to fight to even own the masters of the things that they sit down and record and make. Your issues aren't with individuals. Your issues are with corporations and hedge funds and people who milk and bleed us all dry. So going after an individual who earns $300,000 a week is nothing. That money is barely a drop in the ocean. Okay, it's nothing. Look at the corporations who fund that, who refuse to actually put meaningful money into the communities around, and look at the capitalistic nature of the things that you're saying. I want to take money away from somebody else because they have it. For what reason? You don't know why. Fuck capitalism. That's the whole point of what I'm saying.
That we can agree on, for sure. So, beyond Football Manager, I think I remember asking you before we started that you were feeling okay at the moment, or like you were pretty good.
I'm alive. Yeah, I'm alive.
Did you experience the cold snap, by the way? Sorry, just at this. This is the 13th of September, and there's been a very recent cold snap in Worcester.
What's the cold snap for you though?
Oh, like this is like November weather. Like it's guy in my house was saying that when he got up this morning it was 2 degrees. When he left the house I think it was like 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or something like that. Like it's suddenly gotten very cold, and it will warm up like next week. So that's the point of it being a cold snap. But it's literally gone from I will have my window open all the time. There's never a point at which my window was closed to suddenly I don't want my window to be open. Even at night, even during the day, I tend not to have the window open if I can. So there's just been a very sudden drop, which I think is going to go away. But yeah, it suddenly made I like with me being physically ill, I was a little bit like, oh shit, like am I like how bad am I? But I didn't realize that it was actually like the temperature had gotten fucked recently.
Yeah, I love the cold. So I think the coldest it got here, I think it was like 6 degrees, like during the night anyway. But like the morning, it was like 14 degrees. So
okay, so significant difference then. Yeah.
Yeah, like it was a very much a pleasant.
I mean, London's London.
Feeling.
That makes sense as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like as long as I don't have to, I would like to wear a t-shirt again and not sweat through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy with the cold snap. Let it rain. Let it come. It was hailing a few days ago in London, and I was like, "This, I can't wait to cycle. We're ready for this. We're here."
See, that part I don't
mind. Out and stayed indoors.
See, that part I don't mind at all. I don't mind the rain. I don't mind the winds even to a certain extent. I just don't. I really don't like clouds. I think clouds just like when the UK spends most of its time under full cloud. But yeah, no, just suddenly very cold. No, but you've been generally okay. Or you've been alright.
Yeah, like again, like I had sparring earlier today. I felt really sharp, which is surprising because Wednesday I was out quite late after a game of football. I didn't get back until like 6 o'clock in the morning, and you just like, I thought I was gonna wake up hungover and feeling really bad. I woke up fine, and I was like, yeah, we're still not getting hungover. We're still young. We're still youth. We're still alive. But
That so pissed me off.
yeah. But it's like, I felt really sharp today. I felt really on it.
Good.
I think that's a sign of just getting better at the sport of Muay Thai rather than anything else. People, I'm being more social, and I was having a conversation on Wednesday night, and I was like, oh wow, I feel like I'm a human being, you know? Look at me, I'm talking to people. I'm getting invited into group chats. Look at me. Like, who would have thought? Not me, you know? And it's just like, I it feels weird having conversations with people and being like, hey, I'm a human. I'm conversing, I'm enjoying this conversation, and I'm not wanting to hurt myself to get out of the conversation. I'm not trying to dive out of a window, you know?
Okay, yeah, I get you. You don't want to stump man.
Yeah. So I'm like, do I
Stump
force myself
person.
to be more social all the time? Or do I just accept that, like, you know, this is the social limit I have? But yeah, aside from that, can't complain. No one's dead. Um, you know, and that's it. How are you, Joe?
Jesus. Wait, that in the edit.
Yeah, I think I peaked the whole
uh,
microphone.
you'll see the way. I, I, and so I dropped. I was physically ill there for a bit, which I'm kind of recovering out of. My back is actually fucked right now, like I was saying earlier. And so that I'm basically going to have to ask to do particular kinds of work so that I don't fuck it up, which actually is not standing at till, because standing at till makes your back hurt as well. Because just standing still isn't helpful. But I can't do a ton as far as like picking stuff up. So I can kind of do certain things and not other things a bit better. I also just have to be a bit more careful. Outside of that, though, there's kind of been an interesting feeling, and we'll see where it goes. I don't know what the full notion of this is, but you were talking about earlier, which kind of has a certain relationship to something I was thinking about, or I have been thinking about. I don't know how much I should talk about all of this because, like, I should be going into. We don't have the most amount of time, and I'm also thinking to myself, like, what is relevant?
Do whatever you
So
feel like you need to say.
I
Time
know,
is a
but
construct.
I wish I knew. The time part is less important. I know it's not for us too. It's not that important, but it is something that I have to just think like, what actually would I say and how relevant it would be. So going back a few years, I have, I when I started to first kind of go along the real lines of introspection when because I've always been introspective, but I think the difference is when you don't have ideas to you, and I also keep in mind this is part of the reason why going to a psychologist and things like that, going to have therapy. The reason why it's important is because we're largely very ignorant of the kinds of behaviors humans partake in, like and you know, and this is not to be rude, but like the more kind of like aberrant or abnormal things that we tend to do. Um, More so, really, the things that are just not good for us, not good for our health, or not good for us, the thing, whether it, including things like trauma and other sorts of things, and also understanding things like disorders or however you think of neurodivergency. Trying to understand all of that is not something that you can really do without some level of perspective of the realm of psychology, essentially, without understanding like other people and understanding the full gamut what people go through and how people experience the world. It's very difficult to personally understand yourself within it, not just because there's a difference, because you yourself are not very able to determine yourself. Like, you're going to say things that you don't realize are very irrational, or you're going to, or you have assumptions about the world which are just not actually as universal as you think. Like, most do not think that way. Damn you. So there's a lot I'm saying, but the point is that the sentiment is that when you start going through, if you start being introspective in the way I am, one thing that I'm missing there a lot of the time is experiences, or I'm missing like perspectives or ideas, stories, experiences, etc., that would be able to give me context to everything that I think and feel. And this, if we're going to, if we're talking in a more like developmental process, this is one of the reasons why it's so. It's one of the reasons why it has been shown that actively expressing your concern, actively expressing your feelings to people around you is such a big deal, because even it's enough to have you express your feelings to someone without being attacked back for it, right? Or being, or having, making sure that experience is the experience of expression is very important, essentially, to emotional development. Along this whole thing, I kept coming back to trying to understand myself in my younger years. I talked about primary school and secondary school and the weird feeling I had of being expected to be doing really well, right? And I would, generally speaking, the thing I'm about to talk about, I would generally express towards that era of life, particularly primary school, though it doesn't necessarily come directly from that. It might have just helped feed an aspect of myself, or an aspect of anyone in theory. But, quote unquote, there is something inside me or whatever, or there is something inside everyone. That's kind of the weird mess of this, is what is actually me and not just the norm of a person. To kind of produce this weird experience of needing to do better than other people to feel good, right? The need to be in a position where I feel, if I'm saying it the most cynically as possible, to feel special compared to other people, what could be called a superiority complex. And I was running through this a lot in university, and I remember I was talking to Yasmin and lots of other people about this concept, and also about the idea that superiority complex is one of those things that doesn't necessarily look like how you think it might. Like, a superiority complex doesn't mean you have someone who is very snooty and looking down on you necessarily. It's someone who will look at you and view and view that your position in relation to theirs very in particular, and they will infer a lot of stuff. They will infer negative experiences if they believe that you're higher than them, right? Like, if they believe that they're higher than you, that's when they feel the most normal. Like, that's when I would feel okay, because I was a very jealous person. I don't know if I've ever really expressed this very well, but I realized over time that I'm quite an envious and jealous individual. I tend to look at people and go, and tend to idolize people, in part because I'm very much dislike not being that thing, or not having the thing that they have, or feeling like someone having a thing means that they're taking something from, things like that. And this was a whole thing that I realized and was dealing with. It's one of the reasons why I have a very particularly dislike of the feeling of jealousy. Envy, I don't quite mind so much, because I can see its expression in a positive manner, so on occasion. But jealousy in particular, I have like a really big issue with. And I very, very recently, somehow this came back into my head, and I was thinking about that phrase of like that feeling, needing to feel special phrase. And I sort of just, and I I heard, and there was a video, and I heard it where someone simply said, in a very like benign way, that they said they were not special. No one is special, and that's what brought back some of this memory to me. And I was like, I really am not special, am I? And I say that in the most positive way I can possibly describe. Like, I don't mean that in a negative way, because I don't actually believe it is a positive thing to be arguing that you feel special, right? I don't, or really seeking to feel special in that way. It's kind of hard to explain, in the sense that I don't think it's a positive or negative thing to describe special in that way. I don't think it's right or wrong necessarily. But just to give my point across about why I was referencing, like, there are things that you need, like, to kind of gauge a lot of this, whether it be experience, abstract ideas, and so on. I've, talking about YouTube again and beyond, media has the ability to shape you in good and bad ways, right? We can both agree on that, I imagine. I think that's probably the most like generic thing that you can say, and no one has an issue with that idea. And I can almost say that a lot of periods of my life, especially from a mental health angle, have been expressly changed or improved by a particular piece of media that has said something to me that I otherwise would not have had, which otherwise I never would have gotten that answer on my own, right? I never would have figured it out. Just to go off the top, for the people who are interested, just in a way, Mob Psycho, which you can watch on Netflix, I believe. Mob Psycho is an anime. It's by the same mangaka as One Punch Man.
Oh, okay.
Same artist, and he did one called Mob Psycho. Mob Psycho is autism code, like hard autism code, and it's the idea of like a person who literally contains their emotions, and then like in these like very like anime way, like because there are psychics in the world, he's a psychic, blah blah blah. I don't need to know all that, but the point is that he's actually an incredibly powerful psychic, and it like unleashes in these moments. But there's literally an entire episode where he is mentally stuck in a world where a person is manipulated, so he's experiencing like a simulation essentially of his life, but everyone in his life who is good for him hates him and is bad and or actively ignores him and things like that. So it's like showing a version of his life where he didn't get the support and help that allowed him to be where he was, which is a huge thing, right? The idea of that. And the idea was the guy was trying to like purposely turn him and manipulate him to hate the world. He wanted him to like go, I'm making you suffer. He's trying to make him suffer literally to poison him to reject the world so solidly that he truly just hates everyone. And that's a very real thing. Like, that's an actual thing that happens in real life in terms of the reason why people hate things, or the reason why people have such issues with the world comes from the fact that, well, lots of people don't get support, or are hurt or actively traumatized by other people, or they have issues which are not helped in any way, and so on. And a key thing from that episode was a sort of the reminder there was like a big Friends anime moment of like, oh, do you remember everyone, blah blah blah. But it was something the character said, what he actually says, which is that like if I can be made to change for the worse, then I can also be made to change for the better. And that at that time in my life was incredibly necessary, because at that time in my life, I just believed that I would never change. And at that time in my life, I believed that I was going to never be better than I was at the time, and that things were never going to get better. So it was actually quite a strong and very meaningful thing at the time for me just to hear that. Even another example is, and I think this might have been what led me towards the idea about superiority complexes and things like that a little bit, was BoJack Horseman, another thing you can see on Netflix. It's a very difficult show to watch. I forget, have you seen BoJack?
I have. I quite enjoy
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I think it's one of those shows that's very, like, I'd almost recommend watching it with another person, because it's one of those things that can be quite difficult to watch just on your own, because it's quite emotionally draining at certain points. And depending on your mental state, it can be it can also be one of those things that makes you feel like, oh God, this is a bit too close to home and other sorts of things. But it's very good about mental health and trying to tackle those things while also not, and, giving a protagonist who you genuinely don't like and has issues, while also at the same time that you should empathize with and understand, and also show that they are in a problematic, they're part of a cycle, or a vicious cycle, and things like that. Also very funny show. Very dark humor, very dark humor. I love it. But difficult to watch on occasion. And that show was actually quite good for a variety of things. I won't go to all of it, but just there was a part of it which was that description around the idea of having a kind of superior notion of things, like that feeling of superiority, or that I guess that need. Because I want to be clear when I'm using these words that I'm not giving diagnoses, I'm giving reference framings for what I mean. But that feeling of like that need to be special in a way that causes you pain to do so. And now we jump to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Which I didn't, I did see it when I was younger, but I didn't see it that much because I didn't have the channels for it. And I barely saw, I might have seen, I never saw it in a row, right? Also, you can watch that on Netflix. Not sponsored by Netflix, by the way. I just realized all of these things are on Netflix. The anime, not the live action one. That's what I'm referencing, by the way. Avatar: The Last Airbender. There's Uncle Iroh is such a cool character in that series, and a thing that Uncle Iroh talks, like, there's a few episodes kind of close together where he's talking about pride and shame, and he's talking about and even talking about things like perfection and like the seeking for perfection and things like that, which is essentially a description about the Nirvana fallacy, but it's also a bit more than that. He's a very wise character and a very loving character, very caring character, at the point that he's at, where he was at one point in his life not that way. He was a very he was a general of an army compared to where he was now, which doesn't mean he wasn't caring or anything, but he was a different person at that point. He changed a lot of ideas, as he went through his life, unsurprisingly. But he was talking about with Zuko, which is like one of the best characters in the show, about pride and shame, and about the idea that pride and humility. Actually, that's really what it was. They were talking about pride and humility because Zuko was saying, what is the opposite of pride? It's being prideful is being humble. And he said, no. Oh, no, wait, what was he? Wait, sorry, let me just get this right. I know what I'm trying to say, but I need to do it in the right way. Yes, okay. He was saying the opposite of pride is shame. Zuko was saying, like, to not be prideful is to be shameful. And Ira was like, no, pride and humility are opposite one another. Pride and shame are, and this is where we get into Hegelian ideas, they are dialectics of each other, i.e. that the one can't exist without, well, actually, that doesn't mean dialectic, but one can't exist without the other. They are kind of stuck they're kind of stuck together, because to have pride is to have a position of feeling that could cause you shame in another scenario, right? And this isn't to describe pride or shame in these in as either like sinful or virtuous or anything like that. I'm not really making moral claims about it, but the feeling of that idea of wanting to be, it's almost ambition, I guess, but it's not quite. But it's the ideas that the pillars that we put ourselves on are actually very weak foundations for holding us up, right? With, the pillars we stand on are a lot of the time are not actually they're not fundamentally structurally sound. They're tall and narrow, right? Like, and in order to protect ourselves on those platforms, we have to do so much to maintain, like, something so that no one else could possibly, like, could touch us, because it's so easy for us to for someone to come in and then and you know break the pillar, and then we just fall all the way down, and there's nothing that you've not created anything to catch you on the way down, because all you did was just go up. This idea of pride and shame being so related to one another, and that humility is actually this is not the opposite of pride, but it's actually the answer to pride. It's the answer to shame as well. That there is this recognition of the desire for like perfection and things like that. I think he also says in one episode, like, power and perfection are overrated. I think is like he actively calls out. Like, the show for quote unquote kid show is incredibly adult. I genuinely recommend anyone to watch
that's
it.
like what this is a hallmark of a good show.
Yeah.
So it's what, like, Bluey. I've only seen like one episode of Bluey, and like the thing that the main takeaway of that show is always there's a clip that I got sent a few times now where it's like, I don't want to be an adult, like, and it's like that's really relatable for the parents watching that show with their kids. Like the dichotomy, I guess, or the what's the other word? The juxtaposition of like wanting to be mature and wanting to have adult things, but not wanting to have that commitment of being an adult on a 24/7 basis. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I think a good kid show does anyway.
Yeah, I also just think that the idea of being an adult maybe at that level is something that's a corrupted idea. Like, as in what that even is trying to mean. Because we've had this conversation that I think a lot of quote unquote adults, and more importantly, a lot of just us human beings are really not, are just kind of children, or really that all adults are just children that are older. Because there's so many things that we truly don't understand about the world by the time we reach this age. And it's not, and the notion that we mean by like being an adult versus a child is very much just kind of this, like, it is only barely held on by the fact that it turns out a child doesn't know anything, and an adult at least has learned something in order to survive to that point. But in a world where it's, but in reality, like, you can reach a certain point, and as long as certain needs are met, sure, but there are lots of other needs that can be really not met, and you can be in a much worse state, despite the fact that an adult is trying to tell you how to live in the world, because the way they're telling you to live in the world isn't actually good for you. It's enough to get by, but it's not good enough to thrive or really just be a human being, like you were saying earlier, in the same way. But that's also very difficult. You have to talk about every period of time, like when we're talking about this, and the way that people in different areas of the world have answered these questions and understood it. The fact that obviously in every area of the world, they've had to literally figure out how to live in those areas of the world. And what does that mean? And what do the cultures coming out of it look like as a result? Sort of stuff.
Like there's cultures that, exist, and they're in this country too, where like the idea of having a mental health condition is nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not applicable. And it's like you just work, you just do what you need to do, you work, you get through your day, and you deal with it, and you go to the pub afterwards, you do whatever you need to do, and there's no link to like what that means. So alcoholism doesn't really make sense to a lot of people, because they drink a lot, they love the drink, but there's never like, this is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, which is why we have more people who are our age now being like, oh, look, my dad's an alcoholic, and dealing with that, because they couldn't recognize what alcoholism was. Like, so they throw themselves into it. They drink copious amounts, or they do drugs, or whatever vices they have to. but in their like worldview, that stuff doesn't exist. They just love the drink, you know.
Yeah.
Same with like any condition, like ADHD is just an excuse, you know. And even now, like we're doing a full 360 in terms of like ADHD stigmatism now, and it's honestly it's because of people who like have it but they don't want to get diagnosed and they blame it on it. Like the amount of people who I've heard like this week alone go, "My ADHD does this to me." You're not diagnosed, and I'm not like a gatekeeper. I'm not Heimdall at the gates of fucking Asgard or some shit. Like, but it's a painful thing to deal with because I like just having like my ADHD does this to me, and I always go, how long you been diagnosed? Oh, I self-diagnosed myself, you know. I like it's one of like a few things that make me want to headbutt somebody. I'm like, well, I don't want to headbutt you, I don't headbutt your husband, you know, like you just like you want to just like because it invalidates people who suffer with it a lot, and people have it as a tagline and like an excuse ready to things, you know, and it's difficult because it could just be that you're a cunt, like, and that's okay. That's okay. You don't have to put an attribute to it. So it's like, here we are.
I
We
think
come
that's a
full circle on the ADHD stigma train now.
I think that's I think that's a conversation that maybe we need to have at some point. But I think I'm always sympathetic, I think, personally, to people's desires to describe things that they do feel, whether they are or not. And I also I guess that this is maybe the other part of my thought process is that I personally don't I get it in a larger context, and I agree with you. In a smaller context, like in a more closed personal context to the person, I can actually see how, even if it isn't the thing that they're describing, it's very helpful to describe it in terms of them being able to look at particular aspects, like look at particular symptoms, maybe, and things like that. Again, in a larger context, that doesn't necessarily, if we could define them properly, that would be nice. But I mean, you and I both agree that mental health is actually very difficult to define on occasion for certain people.
Yeah, of
And
course. But then, like,
that you know,
but then again, I'll say this: like, I forget loads of things. Oh, that's my ADHD playing up. No, you could just say you're forgetful. It's okay to be a forgetful. You know, it's okay. Like, it doesn't mean you have a condition. You could just be. Oh yeah, like I've had people like where I'd be, I have ADHD. Oh, so do I. I don't. If there's a really weird thing I do with my breath, I go because I know what's gonna come. Because I'm always gonna be, when were you diagnosed? Like a lot of like an opening the door thing of like, tell me your story. And it's like, I diagnosed myself because I saw my friend has it, and I was, oh yeah, I have it too because we're the same. I'm like, see, you're just a cunt for that alone. Like you're a cunt, but like break it down. Like, oh, you're forgetful.
I
Oh,
don't
okay,
think it is. That's just where I disagree with you, though.
but that's the thing. Like, I think that here's the thing. I know people who say they have ADHD and they don't have it diagnosed, but it makes sense and it's fine. Like, they don't want to get diagnosed for their own reasons, and it makes sense. It totally makes sense why they don't want to get a diagnosis. But I think that when you're like our age now and that's a calling card for you, I think it's a problem. I think it's problematic. I think that when you say things like, "Oh, that's my ADHD," I don't think, because of how broad ADHD can be, like symptom wise, as well. Like,
Yeah.
you create stigmas from it. It's like, oh, like, remember like back in when we were in school when people would be like, oh yeah, like, I'll go gay for that person. Like, and we would laugh at those jokes and things like that. And because like to an extent they could be funny comedic context, but then you realize what happens when like it kind of makes people sound like being gay is a choice. It's like, oh damn, look at that. Like that's how something can be problematic. But like that's an example of like creating a stigma. So right now we have people who say things like, "That's my ADHD." Like, says who? Like, like really, who says who? Like, you might have a reason for why you don't. Ayo, that's totally cool, but you can't then expect people to then go, oh, they have ADHD, and then that be the reason for you doing things wrong or for things not going right or for things like, because then if you're doing nothing about it, but you're telling everyone you have it, what does that mean for you as an individual? Like, do you know how they say like we should treat mental health like a physical injury? You know?
Yeah.
So it's like, cool. You're saying that you have this thing, and you're saying that this affects you in this way. We all must be aware of the fact that this is a thing, but we also can't encourage you to get any sort of help for this thing because you don't want to look introspectively and actually get it sorted for whatever reason. Oh, the waiting list is too long. Agreed. But get yourself on it anyway, right? Like, in the time you spent telling everyone you've had it, you could probably, like, accelerate the process here. Like, it took a very long time for me to get it. This is why am I sitting here hearing you describe things that don't even sound like, it just sounds like you're forgetful. It just sounds like you're negligent of being. So it's like, where do I then, how many times do I have to be kicked by your, like, I don't want to call it laziness, but by your reluctancy, no, by your wanting to be labeled, 'cause that's all it is, really, for a lot of people, is they want to have a label thing, right? Like, we're running a risk of ADHD becoming the quirky thing we say about ourselves now. Like, and you kind of have to gatekeep it a little bit because you don't want it to be a situation where I'm applying for a job, but I can't put it down because there's 15 fucking dumbasses who have like spent their entire time in a social setting saying that they have it when they don't. So then ADHD just becomes like the de facto mental health condition for people who just behave like cunts. Like that's what it is starting to feel like because like there's no reasoning behind like the main conversation I overhear or I see or that gets told to me or that I'm in with is somebody makes a mistake and they say, "Oh, that's my ADHD." Like it's hard, because
Yeah, no,
what do you do?
to be clear, I agree with the sentiment that I think people people who don't want to get a diagnosis because they don't care whether the answer says yes or no. Like in terms of, we talked about people who, in theory, we could say are like, that person, like I think is more likely or less likely to be neurodivergent in this particular way. But if they have no interest in determining that because their life is fine, then who cares? Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, do your thing.
I do find someone, but I agree with you that I don't really see the angle for someone who is actively working within the idea that they are like neurodivergent in a particular way and are not even seeking a diagnosis for that in order for one reason or another, right? And because I agree with you, I don't think the waiting time is really enough of a reason, particularly. Like, it took me a long time. It took me longer than it should have, considering where I was in life at the time. It could have been bad. But the distinction is that and maybe maybe I'm about to say something which ultimately I'm not actually disagreeing with you, but it's more like the way that I'm dealing with it personally, and I don't mean like specifically the ADHD in this case. I mean, I guess this would be things more from that are more personal to me or make sense when I'm describing it in a different scenario. But there are people who are ignorant of a larger context, who are not harmful in certain contexts, or are not harmful in a context that can be understood, and is that you can see by actually discussing with them, you can see how there wouldn't be any controversy, right? And then there are those where it is more controversial. And it's a question of, when we're discussing this, whether that person is heading into controversy or whether that person is heading or isn't, or that person isn't. And it would be difficult, this is a case by case concept. I can't imagine that I can't imagine that there are certain people I imagine who have looked at ADHD or heard of ADHD and are using it in this very, you know, sort of virtue ethics style thing of like, well, I've got like, I'm using it as a label because it's trendy, right? The notion of this conceptually is there. This essentially becomes appropriation, right? But I guess the question is, this again really comes down to the perspective, because obviously I've not met, again, I don't meet people. It's just funny that me and you meet like very different people in life, such that we have very different feelings. So I don't know what that is, but we do tend to end up in different scenarios where the people you describe are not the people that I would describe as being around me, for example. And what that means, I don't know. But realistically, but actually, it's quite helpful. I think it's helpful, to be fair, because
yeah,
it
I
shows
think I'm around more extroverted have to present themselves. So I'm in a situation where a lot of people are looking to define who they are and to express who they are. And I'm also around people who often spend their time on eggshells. So first meetings, social settings in like large groups, like issues with like group dynamics and things like that, who are trying to like settle themselves. And a lot of the time it's people who are less familiar. So then a lot of people look for things to cling to and look for groups to be a part of. So what happens is that like a lot of first time meetings about things, you then deal with people want to just be a part of something sometimes. So like those people, I have those interactions probably more. So then you then have that's how those conversations tend to come about, because it'll be like a Freudian slip, or be like a mistake, or be like something clumsy, you know. And to cover up the mistake, it's like here's my trap card from Yu-Gi-Oh, things like that, you know. So that's why it comes into it. Like I sound really like passionate and like really enthused about this. Like I hate everyone who self-diagnoses, and a part of me does. Part of me does. I'm not gonna sit here and like I'm not like very steadfast in this, because I think a part of me has to be. In the same
you're
way,
allowed to be frustrated. By the way, you are allowed to be frustrated.
I don't know if it's even frustration at the point. It's more like a feeling of like, I said I wasn't a gatekeeper, but in a way you kind of have to gatekeep this shit, because what's going to happen is if it becomes a personality trait, then we run the risk of the stigma train coming back round. And if I decide to be honest on a job application, the person reviewing the job application will look at it and go, oh yeah, that's what like, you know, my friend Tina has. And she's a bit of a div. Don't want him. Because Tina decided that because she drops a drink every now and then, she's going to say she had ADHD. Like, we run the risk of it being that, you know? And I had a friend who does a fair decent amount of poetry herself, and she was saying ADHD for her is becoming the new, like, oh, I'm bisexual trend, which is hilarious, because she gets invalidated nearly daily because she's very legitimately bisexual, but also has ADHD. So it's like, whenever she's with a guy, oh, you're not actually bisexual. And it's like, it's a really funny situation to see. Because like you get invalidated on the daily, your life sucks. like, but also very real.
Yeah, the framing of that is very good. I like the framing that you're giving for it. I'm not disagreeing with you on that at all. I actually think it's very true. I suppose descriptively, we do not disagree with each other at all. I think the difference is actually just a case of how tactfully I'm trying to describe the thing you're describing in a way where I want there to be a genuine experience of this. I don't like, as in, I want this to be a genuine discussion where this wouldn't go up in flames. So I'm trying to describe for the audience, that's, you know, that's kind of the point, that the anger and the justification for the emotional response is correct, and yet there is a recognition that essentially people don't respond well to emotional responses, And the question is describing then what is it that is the point at which this becomes an issue. So the idea of it becoming controversial, the idea of framing it as you do with the idea of being bisexual, which also then goes into like bisexual erasure, for example, and all these other ideas that exist in the hopes that by connecting all of these issues, not as the same issue, but as issues that have a common threat to them or have a common like attacking force against them, that therefore you will see then you will see like how there is a problem with taking ideas about things that people deal with and then trying to slot that into a as an aesthetic into your description of who you are. I mean, we're almost describing aesthetics essentially. We're literally saying like, hey, I know nothing about rock bands, but I really like the aesthetic look. So I've got like the look of like a punk, but I could not give a shit about any of punk ideals or any of these other sorts of things, which has happened. That's like that's a literal a thing of the what's the description of it? I mean, this is going back to capitalism again. The idea of like selling anti-establishment ideas as for the purposes of actually creating profit for the establishment. That idea, I think it's franchising. I think, is that the term for it? Is that a good term for it? Like franchising these sorts of things. There is a social franchising that happens of something like bisexuality, as you described, like ADHD. And I agree with the sentiment that we want people who, if they took a test, if they were triaged and if they went through the process, we want those people to be 100% confident that if they went through that process, we want them to feel confident that if they did, it's a good idea. And you want people to feel that way by saying, hey, these things exist. You can go through these processes. And once you have that, you may have access to certain things you weren't able to before that can help these things. And you can also have like a firm diagnosis and a firmer understanding of you and yourself, and have an idea of like how you might, and maybe access to, I don't think you wouldn't even like not have access to certain things like certain social spaces or whatever, but it gives you more of a kind of reasonable experience and personal reason to feel like you should be allowed in certain spaces or whatever. You want people to feel confident that they can go through with that, but you also don't want every fucking average Joe to just be like, yeah, I'm whatever, and that to me I think is a dysfunction, therefore I'm going to use that so therefore like ADHD, perfect, and then use that and have that whole experience. So I actually agree that diagnosis process is an important one, because we are making a distinction, and that's very relevant. But you also don't want to scare people away from the idea of trying to look into it and trying to identify with it at some level, because the only reason I'm saying this is because I was literally thinking about my relationship to being diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome / autism. Again, I don't really care about the distinction anymore, or that there ever was a distinction. I still don't know what really the distinction is in truth, but I do kind of. But what I mean is I know that that's been argued a lot. I had like what you would essentially call like an imposter syndrome notion about the whole thing, because I genuinely did. Because I very regularly would feel like things are my fault, therefore I couldn't perceive that there was something that I'm working within. Because again, I almost thought of it like as a kind of thing attacking me, as opposed to thinking about it as a personal, internal kind of matrix that I'm working through and using in order to be the person I am. I guess it's quite. I'm not explaining it the best way possible, but I didn't think about talking about this prior. But the idea of even being diagnosed afterwards felt wrong to me at some level, like even after diagnosis, because I think I didn't even at the time really. And again, is the reason I even went through the diagnosis and testing was actually was random, because before that point, I never could see myself as being like the autistic kids that I was aware of in media or aware of even in real life. That these things were too far apart. The idea of it was so that even describing myself after diagnosis feels on occasion, not all the time, but on occasion it does feel like I'm lying and that I am stealing or appropriating something that's not good. And also, I feel like I'm making excuses for myself, right? Like that's a very common feeling, I think, for certain people. And so there is a very real thing there that I just want to kind of like not not disapprove of what you're saying, but go alongside what you're saying.
Well, that's it. Because now, like, I'm in a situation where I don't feel like I can reasonably exist well, because there's legitimate struggles that I have with ADHD. Cool, but now I can't communicate those things because, like, there's so much misinformation, or like people lying about me having it, or like people, or even people with ADHD, making it a generalization for it. Like, in the same way, where like very similar to like I'm black and I love Donald Trump, you know, like that style of thing. Like,
Yes,
I have ADHD and this isn't a thing. Says who? So you have to be like really careful with your use of phrasing and your use of words, and I'm not like it's difficult to police what people say, but people's understanding seems to be very low of stigma surrounding this stuff, and the potential issues it causes for people. So it's always a bit like, how do we? Well, the right answer is simply this, really. Like, you know, don't lie. Don't lie. Like, it's not a cool fashion trend to say you have it. Stop it. Simple, really. Like, there's people who I understand, do your thing, but the people who use it as like a personality quirk, nah. Nah. Like,
yeah, we had bad faith actors. That's we agree on, even if they don't realize they are being bad faith actors.
Well, I don't know, because like that in turn makes you feel like there is such a thing as a good faith actor.
Yes, well, to act in good faith is as in to act, you know, with no, that does work. Good faith actor.
But like, I don't think I struggle with I thinking that someone who like flashes a fake ADHD card whenever things go wrong is a good person in general, or they're acting in a thing of good faith. But I guess the idea would be the ones like who I said, there's people who I know who say they have it, but they're not diagnosed. They don't flash it as an identity card, so it's not really, they don't really fall into that category of it.
Yeah. So an example I think would be if you. I think it honestly comes down to you know, if you talk to someone. And this is what I mean. I guess this is the examples I'm going to use for good faith and bad faith. An example of someone like you describe who is not diagnosed, but you feel that they are, and they aren't flashing it around all the time, is playing it in good faith, because they're not someone who is pursuing the use of an identity that they are not actively seeking to even like actively assure that they have. You know, it's like someone, it's like a person who, it's like if I literally went around and started describing myself as being, I don't know, Welsh, or like I describe myself as a nationality that you would have no fucking idea if I was or not. I could pretend to be like some nationality that, and just be like, yeah, like this is me, like that's my culture or whatever. And I could appropriate that completely without literally any evidence of it whatsoever. Now, generally speaking, a person like you probably wouldn't go, unless I said something slightly outlandish or something that would be less believable if you looked at me, you probably wouldn't assume that I'm lying, right? On average, you wouldn't assume that. Especially if I chose a country that wasn't going to make you go, really, white boy, huh? Like that you didn't have that perspective, that wouldn't make your something ring in your head. But in a very similar way, that person is not, you know, but if I was like, if I was actually, let's say, Welsh, but I thought I might be, but I wasn't going around telling people I was Welsh. That's kind of in a similar situation. I have a feeling about something. I have a feeling about something. Whether I am or not is irrelevant compared to the fact of how I'm actually acting around. So a person in bad faith is someone who makes no effort to attempt to uh, recognize or realize the active thing that they're maintaining is real, or one, or something like that. And yet going around as if it is and maintaining it is real in a social sense, describing that, yes, I am in fact doing this. And bad faith and good faith is generally used in philosophical discussions, or any discussions really, when you're having a conversation with someone where the motive of the discussion is open and correct. Like the idea that if I'm discussing with you about something, that the attempt is for us to come to a peaceful conclusion, or for us to understand one another, or, think of whatever you want it to be. Loads of examples of different contexts of conversations that can happen. And then the bad faith version of this is always that ultimately they're never going to fall towards that objective. They always have a different thing. There are political people online who are not going to go on to, they're never going to have a discussion with someone else about something in order to try and get ideas across to one another in a way as to, and discuss stuff, discuss things with each other, discuss stuff. Wow, how poignant. And discuss ideas with one another that will become a conversation during the actual discussion, that you will have come out with something that you didn't have previously. There are lots of people who will go into those conversations and are using those as platforms to give their own ideas and just admonish what the opposition, quote unquote, opposition, is saying without real evidence, just in order to propagate an emotional idea, in which is a bad argument, not intending to actually have a good argument. That's bad thing. And that's I'm connecting the ideas of that to this sort of social idea of these ideas of identity, or these ideas of actually, like, kind of in a social way, describing these sorts of things. I imagine you could apply it to even more things than that. But again, it's the idea of the implicit goal and objective, which is, hey, if I say that I am autistic, I hope that I'm giving that to you as a way to help our interaction. I'm giving it as a way so you can understand me better. I'm giving it as a way to understand in a larger social context that, hey, I'm an example of someone who's autistic. So now you have an idea of someone who's autistic, and you don't think to yourself, oh, this person who's the only people I can think of who are autistic are these people in my head, right? That's the good faith of me ever describing myself as being autistic in a setting with, whether it be work or people I meet in situations where we just get onto topics like that. Because obviously you and I don't go around when we go out just chatting to people and telling them about how we are autistic or have ADHD, or all of these things. We're not doing that for that purpose. We have lots of objectives, essentially, and social objectives, and that is not the main one. That is not our defining characteristic. For some people, it will be more so, and they will be diagnosed, or blah, blah, blah. You can just, and I know that you don't necessarily like that even, which I can understand.
Like what? Say that again?
Like a person who goes about talking about it all the time, and they are actually diagnosed.
I don't care. Like,
well, sure.
I don't. If you have a diagnosis, am I gonna want to be a best friend? Probably not, because it'd probably just be annoying. Like if most things, I don't believe that your condition is your personality.
Yeah. So I just mean that you would agree with that sentiment, but the point is that but that's the point, right? Is that in the social objectives that kind of exist, we're not the idea of someone transgressing that in such a way as to be like, I'm not actually going to represent, I'm going to pretend to represent something that I know to represent, except you don't know that you represent, is problematic. And that's where it becomes, an issue, like we were saying.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other sides to everything that we discuss. Like, I'm sure somebody will have will read the right act into why I'm wrong for it all, and I don't think my mind will ever change on it. So I just
I
don't
don't
ever
think
view
you're
it.
wrong, though. I just
I
don't
know
think
you
you're
don't.
wrong. Yeah. But
I never said you like. I'm more speaking wider, like above you, above myself. Like, it's more of a like because I know there's some people who passionately do it, who listen to the show.
yeah,
Like, and
so
I realized midway through what I was, they're gonna think I'm having a go at them solely. Okay, yes, I am, but you got caught in the crossfire of something larger than.
you're cutting out a bit here and there, by the way, just so you know. So apologize.
Uh,
Some of your stuff is.
I was saying, I was moving on my chair. It's my ADHD. I was saying that like there's people who are gonna say that there are people who listen to the show a lot, and they're gonna think I'm coming for them in what I'm saying. I'm not. They weren't even in my mind as I was saying this stuff. It only like came to my head just now. I'm not angling for you, but if you get caught in this crossfire, then maybe it's a good thing. Like I have very little room for the other side and like trying to justify anything because I'm not attacking a thing or a group of people here. I'm attacking like what is a very clear and obvious problem. You know?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. I wasn't saying that you ever felt at any point that I was disagreeing with you. I said that I agree with you, or not that I agree with you, that I think you're correct, because it's not a question of whether you're correct or not, or whether I agree with you. You are, or whether people agree with you. You are saying something that is true, regardless of whether or not there are nuances to this discussion that will push the like the kind of higher concept ideas like one way or the other. What you're describing is perfectly is a statement that does actually hold. It does, it's a valid concern, or it's a valid sentiment. You are saying things that are true, and I yes, I would also say I largely also agree with you in these higher ways as well. It's not even a question for me. But it's more important that from an audience perspective, or I guess just in discussion about mental health, that we're not that more importantly, you are actually saying things that are that I think is not that might not sound great to a lot of people, but ultimately there is something there that is actively very real. And again, by kind of trying to find these other framings is the way to help get that across. The way to help make it the way to help us to kind of see how the thing that we're talking about is much like this other thing that we would agree is problematic. So I yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I don't know. I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I do.
Thank you. I never know if I'm understandable.
I think it's just more like, yeah. I think I've grown a level of like disdain for it. So I don't know. I feel like I'm going to end up having a pressurized conversation during the week of why why like what everything I said felt really targeted, or because like the show's been really good for not doing that. Like I've never come at somebody, and I realized immediately through what I was saying is like like one person who's listened and like I like them a lot might think I'm actually hurt, like going after them exactly. And I hope when they listen to this episode, they listen to it all the way through because none of the examples is based around them, and they can verify this as well. Nothing was like remotely about them because they weren't even in the forefront of my mind. But they are sadly someone that does this, I'm like, this is a problem, but you weren't the catalyst of this discussion. But like, before you decide to come at me midweek with a conversation about this, go fuck yourself. like,
You're not.
stop.
I love your self-sabotage.
Like, you know, like you want to factor in this conversation to begin with, but I feel like you want to be. So we're gonna have a war, and I'll report next week if I'm alive or not. But like, yeah, you're not. Yeah, you weren't a relevant catalyst. But I did realize midway through that, oh shit, like one person in my life might feel targeted, but everything I say stays the same. So if you're gonna come up with me with like a targeted like discussion, everything I'm saying here just means the same. I'm just gonna repeat everything the same. So go fuck yourself and come at me.
You know what? Just to bring it back round and to do the poetry thing of it's a circle. The discussion we were having about footballers and like footballers' wages and salaries and things like that is very similar to this in terms of the discussion should be towards the larger context and not about people, not about individuals, but about,
and also because football
the
is
larger
life.
description. But you have not. But I presume that you have, in good faith, been doing this and have been talking about this not as a targeted thing. And I do believe that because I know who you are. But
the reason why it came up and I remembered like this specific individual because it was on my phone and I was thinking, oh, I might have to go to the pub today. And I was like trying to plan that. And I got lots of messages from people saying, come out, come out, come out. And one of them was from her. And I was like, oh no. No.
Well, now I think it's going to be very unlikely that this person doesn't figure out who they are. Like, if this was ever a question, I think now you've made sure that they know.
Oh, because I want them. I actually want to have this discussion and bring it next week.
All right.
And see. They might stab me, so if I don't come next week, then you know I'm dead. But
okay, give me their name.
But you know what? If they stab me, maybe if they actually stab me, maybe they do ADHD. Who knows? Maybe it's like maybe
that's the convincing. That's what convinces you.
It will take a court trial, my death, and for them to do a psychiatric assessment for her to get off on a liability of being clinically insane.
Oh,
it's worth the whole thing. It's been 2 hours.
We can make
I don't know how I'm
jokes.
going to cut this thing.
We can make these jokes. We have autism and ADHD.
Like, you know.
Oh no.
It's been 2 hours. Hopefully, truncating sound will make this 1 hour 40 something. I doubt
honestly,
it.
You could turn this into 2 episodes, I guess.
I am, because I think we split one bit and the whole self-diagnosis chat could be a whole nother. But
sure, I don't know what that ends up looking like with the like I really don't know what that's going to look like from a proportional standpoint. Like what each
part
episode
1
contains.
Is like 25 minutes. Part 2 is 2 hours.
I think it was like 40 to 50, but I might be wrong.
Yeah. But yeah, man, Jesus. Anyway,
yeah,
I'm gonna bring it to a close.
Yeah, I think honestly, these kinds of discussions have to happen. Though. You need to have like a very direct. You need to be direct on it as well as be not direct. Like I don't know how, I'm not to describe it properly, but you need both sides because you need to have people be essentially pointed. You need to have like not even people. You need to have ideas pointed out dramatically, but you need the people that have those ideas to recognize that we're not targeting them specifically, right? That like it's not because we talked about this before. You are not your ideas. Your ideas are not you. You can change your ideas. You can change who you are. It's not, there isn't this like we're not snipers. We're not trying to kill you all. We're like but we're putting targets on your back, and we're just describing that those targets exist, and we could have shot you if we wanted to, but we don't actually want to shoot. Wow, that was way more violent than I meant for it to be.
Yeah,
but
I don't know what the fuck you were like. Jesus Christ, man!
I started with an analogy, and then it just really came out badly. So yeah, all right. Well, there you go. We all.
Here's
That's
Joe
my version of what Alex did.
actively declaring that the whole beginning part of the show, like, no, this show is we're gonna shoot you. You better. Guys, this is probably gonna be a two-parter. Nah, I want the heat. Give me all the heat. Like, when we eventually have a live show and someone brings this episode up and they go on a passionate thing about how they have to self-diagnose and they didn't want to be stigmatized by the doctors, I can guarantee you, Joe, on a stage in front of 150 people at W.H. Smith somewhere, okay, I'm going to look at that person, pull the microphone to my face and go, yeah, go fuck yourself, man. We're going to take 2 steps.
Hot boy, cool boy. Okay.
I have the Uber ready, like, put in my phone as well. Go fuck yourself, press the button quick. Like, yeah, we're going to take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. We're in the wind. See ya.
Love you.